The year is 122 CE. The Roman Empire stretches across 3 continents, its armies feared and its monuments admired. On the northern frontier, Emperor Hadrian has ordered a wall, a staggering 73 miles of stone and turf cutting across the rugged hills of Britain. The purpose is clear: to defend Rome's dominion from the fierce tribes beyond. But for the young legionary sent to this distant outpost, the real question gnawing at him is not about strategy, not about politics, not even about survival. Instead, it's far more human, far more immediate: what's for dinner? If you've ever wondered what it was like to be a Roman soldier standing guard at the edge of the known world, today you'll find out in a way few people imagine. Stay with me as we uncover not just the military story, but the culinary story: how the legions of Rome fed themselves on Hadrian's Wall, what ingredients were hauled across an empire to supply them, and how food became both a tool of empire and a comfort of home. By the end, you'll see that the Roman conquest of Britain wasn't only written in stone and blood, but also in bread, pork, apples, and garum. Beyond the battlefield. When we think of Rome's expansion into Britain, we often imagine clashing swords, clanking shields, and the sound of marching feet. We picture the legions building fortresses, laying roads, and raising that massive wall. Yet the daily reality of sustaining an army, the countless meals that had to be prepared, the endless supplies of grain, meat, and wine that had to be delivered, was as vital to Rome's success as its tactics on the battlefield. Food wasn't just sustenance. It was morale. It was culture. It was empire made edible. For the men posted in far-off Britannia, food meant survival in a cold, damp land. But it also meant identity. By eating pork stewed with apples, or sipping garum spice sauces, soldiers affirmed they were Romans, even at the very edge of the world. To understand how the Roman army fed itself in Britain is to understand both the fragility and the strength of the empire. Fragility, because a hungry soldier cannot fight. Strength, because Rome's logistical machine ensured that food, from Spain, Africa, the Middle East, and beyond, made its way to a windswept frontier in northern England. Life on Hadrian's Wall. Hadrian's Wall was not just a barrier, it was a living organism. Forts such as Vindolanda, established even before the wall itself, became bustling hubs of military and civilian life. Soldiers lived there with their families, traders set up shop, craftsmen plied their trade, and, most importantly, food was exchanged, cooked, and consumed in staggering quantities. Vindolanda has yielded some of the most precious artifacts of the Roman world: thin wooden writing tablets with records of daily life. These fragments allow us to reconstruct, piece by piece, the diets of the soldiers who once stood watch. They mention pork crackling, trotters, eggs by the hundreds, chickens by the score, barrels of wine, jars of garum, and baskets of apples. Far from a monotonous diet of gruel, Roman soldiers stationed in Britain enjoyed remarkable variety. What's more, this food wasn't simply imported from the Mediterranean. Rome's army adapted. They tapped into local resources, cultivated new crops, and blended Roman tastes with British produce. In doing so, they reshaped Britain's food landscape forever. Roman pork with apples, a taste of the frontier. Among the many recipes associated with the Roman frontier is one preserved in Apicius, the famed Roman cookbook, Manidalmatianum, or pork stewed with apples. The dish combines meat, fruit, herbs, and spices into a balance of sweet and savory flavors unmistakably Roman. Was it eaten on Hadrian's Wall? Perhaps. We cannot be certain. But the ingredients are all there in the Vindolanda records: pork, apples, garum, honey, leeks, wine, and herbs. It's a dish that bridges two worlds: the Roman tradition of rich, complex sauces and the British abundance of apples and livestock. When a legionary sat down to such a meal, he was not just filling his stomach. He was tasting empire itself: Spain's olive oil, Africa's spices, Italy's wine, and Britain's apples all stewed together into a single pot. Soldiers and their daily rations. Roman soldiers ate two main meals each day, dictated not by hunger but by discipline. Trumpets signaled breakfast and supper, just as they marked the changing of the guard or the call to arms. Meals were a collective act, reinforcing order. The basic ration consisted of grain, usually wheat, sometimes rye or spelt, occasionally barley. Barley, however, was considered inferior and even punitive. A soldier fed on barley bread was effectively being punished for poor performance. Wheat was the standard, and it was baked into loaves in large communal ovens built into the walls of the fort. But the grain ration was only the beginning. Meat supplemented the diet: pork, beef, lamb, goat, poultry, and game. Fish from local rivers, oysters from distant coasts, and cheese from both Roman and native sources added variety. Soldiers were also entitled to wine or beer, depending on their background. What's striking is the scale. A garrison of 500 men required tons of grain, hundreds of animals, and barrels of wine every month. Feeding the army was an empire-sized task. The work behind every meal. Each contubernium, a group of 8 soldiers, was responsible for its own cooking. One unlucky man would grind grain for hours each day, turning wheat into flour with a hand quern. Others prepared the fire, fetched water, and stewed rations into a meal. Cooking was not a specialized task, it was a duty of all soldiers. Yet records show that soldiers took pride in their food. They etched their names on querns, requested spices in their letters, and even ordered delicacies from London. Archaeological finds, amphorae of garum, jars of olives, fragments of spice containers, prove that food was more than fuel. It was a connection to Rome, a reminder that even in distant Britain, they belonged to a world-spanning empire. Meals were also moments of community, where men who had marched, drilled, and fought together bonded over the same pot of stew. In such shared labor and shared meals, Roman discipline became Roman identity, forged as much in kitchens and hearths as in training grounds and battlefields. Imports and local produce. Rome's logistical system funneled goods across astonishing distances. Wine from Italy and Gaul, garum from Spain, olives from the Mediterranean, and grain from across the provinces flowed into Britain. These imports mixed with local resources: apples, berries, oats, venison, salmon, and pork from British farms. In many cases, the Romans introduced new crops altogether. Carrots, parsnips, leeks, garlic, cucumbers, and lettuce were cultivated in Britain because Roman soldiers demanded them. Roads built for military purposes doubled as trade routes, ensuring that foreign foods reached even the most remote forts. This blending of imported and local produce reshaped Britain's agricultural landscape permanently. Foods that are commonplace in Britain today, carrots, lettuce, onions, owe their introduction to Rome's military appetite. Roman demand encouraged local farmers to adapt, cultivating fields not just for themselves but for the empire. Over generations, this created a hybrid cuisine, where Roman recipes met British ingredients, leaving behind a culinary legacy as enduring as Roman walls and roads. Feasting and prestige. Food was not just daily fare, it was a stage for prestige. Officers like Flavius Carialis, prefect of the Batavians, entertained high-ranking guests with banquets that included chicken, spices, and fine wine. Such meals reinforced status and authority, reminding everyone that rank was marked not only by command but also by cuisine. Even within the ranks, food created hierarchy. Centurions like Felicio, whose name survives in records, consumed massive amounts of bacon, lard, and spices. Ordinary soldiers might subsist on bread and porridge, but officers dined on delicacies. Banquets also connected soldiers to Roman culture. In far-off Britain, feasts with wine, garum, and chicken linked officers to traditions stretching back to Julius Caesar and Augustus. The symbolism of beer and wine. One of the clearest cultural contrasts was in drink. Romans valued wine, diluted with water, as civilized. Beer, on the other hand, was dismissed as barbaric. Pliny the Elder mocked it as a crude way to get drunk on water. Yet on Hadrian's Wall, many soldiers were not Italians but Batavians and Tungrians from the Low Countries. For them, beer was the drink of home. Letters from Vindolanda plead for beer supplies. Beer became not only tolerated but necessary, showing Rome's flexibility in adapting to local traditions. Wine and beer together reflected the empire's diversity. On Hadrian's Wall, both drinks flowed, one symbolizing Rome's elite culture, the other symbolizing local traditions absorbed into the empire. So far, we've seen that feeding the Roman army in Britain was not a simple matter of rations. It was a massive logistical operation, a cultural statement, and a source of identity for men far from home. Through pork stews and apple dishes, through communal ovens and amphorae of wine, Rome maintained its hold on Britain. Now we'll explore the deeper consequences of Rome's food system in Britain, the human cost of grinding grain, the cultural fusion of Roman and British diets, the role of food in military discipline, and the echoes of Roman cuisine that still linger in Britain today. The daily grind, bread before battle. Every soldier in Roman Britain knew the weight of his ration, but he also knew the grindstone. Each contubernium, the squad of 8 men sharing a tent and a hearth, was issued grain, not bread. It was up to them to transform it into food. Grinding grain was relentless. The small hand querns recovered from sites like Vindolanda tell us what this work was like. 2 stones, one set atop the other, had to be turned for hours to produce flour fine enough for bread or porridge. Soldiers rotated the duty, but there was no escape from it. Before shields were polished or swords sharpened, flour had to be ready. Bread was central. It was baked in ovens built into the forts, each oven big enough to bake dozens of loaves at once. The smell of baking bread would have filled the fort, reminding men that while Rome's empire ran on conquest, it also ran on wheat. Meat on the frontier. If bread was the backbone, meat was the heart of the soldier's diet. Archaeological digs across northern Britain have turned up bones from pigs, cattle, sheep, goats, and chickens. Pork seems to have been particularly valued. Cuts of belly and trotters, even crackling, appear in Vindolanda's supply records. Livestock was raised locally as much as possible. Farmers living near forts sold animals to the army, creating a military-civilian economy. In return, soldiers provided protection and a ready market. It was symbiosis born of necessity. Without animals, the army would starve. Without the army, farmers risked raids from northern tribes. Meat was often salted, smoked, or boiled. Pork might be stewed with apples, beef roasted on spits, chicken simmered in garum-laced broths. Soldiers shared not only food but recipes, blending the flavors of their homelands into a shared military cuisine. Vegetables, herbs, and the Roman taste. Roman soldiers expected more than meat and bread. The empire was famous for its gardens, and Britain was no exception. Excavations show that carrots, onions, leeks, and garlic were cultivated near forts. Herbs such as coriander, dill, and parsley were either grown locally or imported dried. Romans prized flavor. Meals were rarely plain. Honey sweetened sauces, vinegar sharpened them, and garum, the fermented fish sauce Rome adored, added depth. Soldiers stationed in Britain requested garum by the amphora, proof that even in the cold north, Roman palates demanded Mediterranean tastes. Apples, pears, and plums added sweetness. Berries gathered from the local countryside found their way into stews. Soldiers ate at suesi. Soldiers ate a cuisine that was both practical and surprisingly sophisticated. Supply lines of empire. The real marvel of Rome's food system in Britain was not the ingredients themselves, but the supply lines that delivered them. Amphorae fragments at forts tell a story of goods shipped across the Channel from Gaul, sailed up rivers, and hauled overland by oxen and carts. Wine traveled from Italy and Gaul. Olive oil came from Spain. Spices like pepper may have arrived all the way from India, passing through Roman ports in Egypt before making the long trek to Britain. Even garum, produced in Spain and southern Gaul, was sealed in jars and hauled north for the legions. The Roman army in Britain was not living off the land alone. It was plugged into a global supply chain that stretched across the known world. In feeding its armies, Rome was feeding its empire. But these routes were fragile. Bad weather, piracy in the Channel, or unrest in Gaul could cut off supplies for weeks. That is why forts often stockpiled grain and salted meat, building storage granaries raised on stilts to keep out damp and rodents. To keep one legion supplied meant hundreds of wagons, boats, and laborers constantly in motion. Each meal eaten in Britain was a reminder of the empire's reach and its vulnerability. Food as discipline. Meals were not private affairs. Trumpets signaled them, just as they signaled drills, marches, and watches. Eating was part of discipline. Soldiers ate together, cooked together, and were expected to maintain order even at the table. Rations were issued by officers, reinforcing hierarchy. Bread and porridge might be equal, but access to delicacies was not. A centurion could demand extra pork, an officer could host a banquet, but an ordinary legionary ate what he was given. The communal meal reinforced unity. No soldier went hungry while another feasted. Yet within that unity, rank still spoke through flavor. This orderliness had a purpose. Rome understood that discipline was built not only on the battlefield but also in the mess hall. A soldier who respected rules at the table was more likely to respect them under fire. Shared cooking and eating also created bonds. 8 men grinding grain and boiling stew together learned to rely on one another. The table became a training ground, shaping habits of loyalty and obedience that could mean survival when the shields locked and the arrows flew. The human cost of feeding Rome. Behind every Roman meal in Britain lay toil. Farmers bred pigs and cattle for sale to the army. Traders risked storms to ship wine across the channel. Local Britons labored in fields to grow carrots, onions, and grains demanded by Rome. And within the fort, the soldier himself ground the wheat, stoked the fire, and cooked the food. For all the grandeur of Roman supply lines, daily meals came down to human sweat. For civilians, the army was both opportunity and burden. Selling to soldiers brought profit, but requisition, forced supply at fixed prices, brought resentment. The food that sustained Rome also sowed seeds of discontent among the conquered. Farmers who once grew crops for their own villages now found their best harvests redirected to Roman storehouses. Market stalls were full of goods, but prices rose beyond the reach of poorer locals. Meanwhile, the army's hunger demanded labor: woodcutters for fuel, millers for flour, drovers for herds. Feeding Rome meant feeding the machine of conquest, and many Britons wondered if they were partners in this system, or its prisoners. Cultural fusion on the plate. Perhaps the most fascinating part of Roman food in Britain is how it fused cultures. Romans introduced new crops, but they also adopted local traditions. Beer, dismissed by Italians as barbaric, became accepted because auxiliary troops demanded it. Local game, fish, and berries enriched Roman stews. Over time, Britain's cuisine changed permanently. The carrot, once white and woody, was refined under Roman cultivation. Apples spread in orchards. Herbs became household staples. Even long after Rome withdrew, its culinary fingerprints remained. Food was empire's quiet conqueror. Roads may crumble and walls may fall, but onions, apples, and carrots stayed rooted in Britain. Soldiers from North Africa introduced chickpeas, men from the Balkans brought their taste for cabbage, Gallic auxiliaries carried recipes heavy with garlic and leeks. Slowly, a hybrid cuisine took shape, neither wholly Roman nor wholly British. Archaeological finds of Roman-style mortaria, mixing bowls with gritty surfaces for grinding herbs and spices, show how local kitchens adapted Roman cooking methods. What people ate became proof of how deeply Rome had sunk its roots into daily life. And though the legions would one day march away, their recipes remained, woven into Britain's soil and memory. Feasts of power. For officers, food was more than sustenance, it was theater. Banquets in forts displayed wealth and rank. Amphorae of wine, exotic spices, and platters of chicken and pork demonstrated not only prosperity but connection to Rome's heart. Letters from Vindolanda show officers requesting delicacies from London and Gaul. These feasts cemented alliances, rewarded loyalty, and reminded everyone that Rome's order was not only enforced with swords but reinforced with shared meals. Even emperors understood this. Hadrian himself dined with soldiers, but always with subtle distinction. He ate from the same pots, yet his portion was richer, his wine finer. Food revealed hierarchy even when cloaked in camaraderie. Officers used these meals as political tools, knowing that what appeared on the table spoke louder than speeches. A well-stocked banquet reassured subordinates that their commander had influence in supply lines, while a meager spread suggested weakness. In frontier forts, where morale was fragile and loyalty constantly tested, a feast was both a celebration and a declaration of power. Echoes of Roman food in Britain today. Though nearly 2,000 years have passed, traces of Rome's army diet linger in Britain. Apples, carrots, onions, and garlic remain staples. Bread remains central. Pork, beloved by Roman soldiers, continues to dominate British tables in bacon, sausages, and roasts. Even the habit of communal drinking, wine for some, beer for others, has echoes in Britain's pub culture, where camaraderie and rank intermingle over shared mugs. Rome may have fallen, but its soldiers left behind more than roads and walls. They left flavors that never faded. Archaeologists still unearth Roman cooking pots, spice jars, and mortaria in British soil, proof that kitchens and hearths were as much instruments of empire as legions and limes. The Roman habit of seasoning with herbs like dill, coriander, and parsley shaped local palates long after the legions withdrew. Even the British love of hearty stews reflects Roman influence, mixtures of meat, vegetables, and herbs simmered together to stretch supplies and comfort communities. Food became one of Rome's quiet legacies, carried forward not by emperors or generals but by ordinary people cooking in their homes. The final meal on the wall. Imagine a soldier in the waning years of Roman Britain, around 400 CE. Supplies are thin. Pay is uncertain. Rumors swirl that Rome itself is under siege. He sits with his comrades in a drafty fort, eating bread baked from local grain, pork stewed with apples from a nearby orchard, and drinking rough beer brewed in the village below. It is a meal that carries centuries of history. Imported recipes and local ingredients. Military discipline and personal hunger. Empire and frontier. In that stew, Rome's story is written, a story not only of conquest, but of adaptation, endurance, and human appetite. Each bite speaks of distant trade routes now faltering, of officers once feasting in style, of civilians supplying an army that may soon vanish. The soldier does not know it, but this simple meal could be his last under Rome's banner. Tomorrow, he may eat as a mercenary, a farmer, or a fugitive. Yet in that moment, around the fire with comrades, Rome still lives, in bread, in pork, in beer, in memory. Rome's empire of food. Rome conquered with armies, yes, but it ruled with bread. The legions in Britain were more than soldiers, they were consumers, shaping an entire island's agriculture to feed their appetites. Food was empire made visible and edible. When we look at Hadrian's Wall today, we see stone. But behind those stones were ovens baking bread, cauldrons simmering pork and apples, amphorae filled with wine, and men asking the most human of questions, what's for dinner? Rome's true legacy in Britain was not just walls or roads, but the tastes that linger, the crops that thrive, and the recipes that echo through time. If you found this journey into the kitchens, fields, and forts of Roman Britain fascinating, don't stop here. Explore more of history's hidden stories, the everyday lives that made empires rise and fall. Subscribe, share this story, and join me as we uncover the world not just through battles and kings, but through the meals that sustained them. Because to understand what people ate is to understand who they truly were.